Have you ever noticed that when you know how to do something, it seems like you always have that project looming over your head? Or when you get a new skill, everything that you see is gonna do with that skill? Well, it seems like when you're working on cars, that's always the case. Whether your wife wants you to work on her car, or your parents, or your race car is like, hey, I'm done being on jack stands. Well, there's always something to do, and today is one of those days. It's just a basic maintenance day. Today we're working on my wife's X5. The brake fluid change, light, monitor, check control message has been on in her dash for months now. And that's because I can't remember if when I did the fluid changes on it after we bought the car last year, if I did brake fluid or if I saw that it was coming, I don't know. So one of the things that we're gonna do differently with this brake flush is I've got this new tool here. This is going to allow me to check to see if my fluid is any good. And really what it's doing is it's checking to see if there's moisture content in the fluid that is in excess of really what it should be, which means that you're going to have diminished braking performance and it's going to ruin your enjoyment of the vehicle when, well, it doesn't stop. That would suck, right? So we're going to go ahead and get this thing popped open, check it, and determine, do we really need to do a brake flush? So with our cover off, one of our first checks is to take a look around, make sure we don't see any debris, leakage, or otherwise. Really, it's unlikely that you'll find anything like that. And then we're going to get our cap off, and we're going to look for any extra debris that's in the system. And look at the color of our fluid. Ours still has a nice light tint to it. It's not overly dark. Now let me get a rag to set this off to the side, because as this drips, brake fluid can be damaging to paint if it is allowed to sit for long enough on that paint. It's always good to keep a clean workspace. Now I'll try to stick your head down in there, see what we can see. Fluid is cloudy, and when I put a light up to it, I can see that it's not completely clear or opaque through the container. This is a perfect opportunity to try our new tool. I will say that the tool itself did not like acetone. I went to clean it off after testing on another fluid, and it took the lettering right off. What we're looking at is we're looking to see our numbers right here. We have our battery indicator, and then we have OK and not OK. Green means go, so let's see what this fluid reads. We put the indicators here in the fluid, and you can see we're reading in the OK range. But because of the color, I'm going to go ahead and flush it and assume that I didn't change it when I thought I did this last year. It shows less than 1%, which is in the OK range. Up here in this area, not good. We'll create our own sample once we get this out of here and see what really bad fluid looks like. Well, the fluid tested good, so I guess the impetus for this episode is null and void. Well, maybe we should talk about why all the mechanics are quitting and how the industry is messed up. I mean, you know why the mechanics are quitting. The industry is messed up. The way that they pay people sucks. And if you know me well enough by this point and you've seen some of my other videos, you know that I'm changing the fluid. So let's get that done. What I'm going to use is I'm going to be using a fluid extractor like this one here. You can find links to all these tools down below. They are Amazon affiliate links, so if you buy one of them, thank you. It'll be like 14 cents to me, and I super appreciate it. What we're going to do is we're going to try to suck all the old fluid out.
Suck it.
I like that. Keep your minds clean. That way, when we're pushing the fluid through to the calipers, we got nothing but good clean stuff going in there. With this fluid extractor, it can go both directions. And you want to make sure you're not pumping junk in there, so I always forget which way is pumping, so I will run it. Oh, that's the wrong direction. I can smell some old fluid in there. So this fluid is coming out relatively clear. Using my tester there, it was showing between 1 and 2% moisture content, and the cloudiness of it is to the point where I'm comfortable changing it. Make sure that while you're doing this, you don't get brake fluid on the painted surfaces. I know we covered that already, but it can wreak havoc on all these painted surfaces over time. I know that it doesn't melt the paint right off, but it does eat into it. And again, that takes time. All right, to get our filter out, you have to lift it up, grab onto it with something. I like to just use a little pair of channel locks. It's gonna look kind of mauled up from doing this, but as you can see, I put a rag there to keep from splashing my face with any fluid. And just the same, we're going to pull her up. We're going to inspect around here for any debris buildup in there. It's actually really clean, minor debris at best. So we'll clean all this off. You can see that just wiped clean off of there. Make sure that you're doing this with a clean rag. I know these look dirty, but I have washed these countless times and they are just a bit stained. I will wipe this down with some isopropyl alcohol so that I know that there's no residue and that everything evaporates off and that I'm not going to be contaminating my system with anything that shouldn't be in there. So to do the actual flushing, we're going to make sure we fill the reservoir up with fresh fluid. Now, if you watched my previous video where I was doing the brake flush and the brake work or brake inspection on my track car, well, I messed up. I got to talking to the camera a little bit too much. I didn't have my jug full and I pushed air through the end of my system in through my clutch line. That was a bummer. We're not going to do that this time. This time, we're only going to pull out enough fluid so that we don't fill up our reservoir with a full 12 ounces. That way we can top off the top. We'll top off the fluid. That's a better way of saying it. So like I was saying, I sucked out all the rest of the fluid here. I've got my screen nice and cleaned up. Rinsed it off with isopropyl. Still a little bit damp, so I'm going to wipe that down before we put it back, and we'll use the screen to make sure that we don't drop any debris into our reservoir. Okay, our reservoir, shiny, clean, no debris in there. You can see right there where our pliers grabbed it. That's not going to harm anything. The actual retainers are down here, these pressure points. Drop that guy back in. A little squirt of fluid. Now, one thing to bear in mind when you are working on your brake fluid reservoir, if your reservoir is low, where might that fluid have gone? Well, it's an often misconstrued thought that the fluid has left the system. If your brake fluid is leaving the system, you have bigger problems. That fluid didn't actually go anywhere. What it's doing is it's taking up the space that your pads used to take up. So if you come in here and you fill this up and either you or a less experienced mechanic goes to replace your brakes and they squeeze those calipers back into the fully open position, well, the fluid was still in the system and had to go somewhere. So it's going to come back out the top. So I recommend not overfilling your reservoir past where it might have been or should have been prior to your starting. I don't have that problem because when I go to do my brakes, I always check my reservoir first before I go expanding my calipers. Just food for thought as you're working through your own system. Next up, we're going to be using our Motive Products pressure bleeder. Now you can use this in one of two ways, much like I've described in the past. You can use it as an air device to push the air down and through, or you can fill it up with fluid and push the fluid through, which is the recommended method in my book. But in order to do that, you have to buy enough fluid to put in here, and if you put 12 ounces at a time, these little tiny bottles, it becomes a little bit difficult because, well, this is a large jug and it's harder to get that fluid out from the corners. So this way, we're just going to fill it up with air. We've already opened our reservoir up. If you were to buy one of these, you're not going to have this hose and quick disconnect and everything on there. You're going to get the European cap to fit onto your master cylinder, which is what this is. This is just designed for a different system. I augmented mine because I was bringing 2 pressure bleeders together for this job. I used to have a much larger pressure bleeder working in the dealership system because, well, we would do multiple bleeds a day. So it held 3 gallons, 2 gallons, something like that. We're going to pump this up to 15 or so PSI. Make sure our valve is open. Then we're going to head down underneath and we'll start at the right rear wheel. So like I said, we're going to start here on the right rear wheel. We're using our handy dandy smart jug, and I've marked out about how much fluid max I can take out of the system. If I get anywhere near this time, make sure to top it off first. So we're going to connect up to our bleeder screw. Then pop the system open. Now, if your bleeder screw is super duper stuck, you don't want to use an open-ended wrench. You want to use a line wrench, which will have hooks around the front. In fact, let me grab one of those while this is thinking. There's some fluid coming out. All right, so you can see the difference here. Here's a regular open end. Here's a line wrench. These guys, can't tell if we're focusing. Are we focusing? There we go. This will wrap all the way around that bleeder screw to make sure you don't slip off of it, where this one can easily slip. I'll have links down below to a set of line wrenches, just in case you don't have any, well, because they can be pretty important. In my case, bleeder opened up nicely. If you're working on an old vehicle, it might not, or if it's crusty or corroded or East Coast, rust belt type of car, well, you're gonna have a problem. My fluid is coming out pretty green, which means that there was a bit of moisture in my system. There's a lot of debate on why the fluid is green like this. Is it algae? Is there copper in the system that's being oxidized by the brake fluid? Any number of different things. I tend to believe it's algae, but could be a mythical creature from the beyond. I don't know. I'm not a chemist. I just know it shouldn't be green. Should be clear-ish, light brown colored. And that's going to be enough for this one. Remember, when you're tightening these or closing them off, all you're doing is closing the gap. There's not much else going on here. There's not a significant amount of torque that's needed for this. In fact, if you put a significant amount of torque on there, you are going to hate it the next time you have to do this. Now, we'll do the left side. So if you're using a bottle like this, you are going to see air come through the system. That's because all the fluid drains down into the bottle. Then there's air, then you hook it up to the next one, and it has to flow through again. So I like to watch closely to make sure that my fluid level is changing. With only 15 PSI up there, it's not applying a ton of pressure, so this is going to move fairly slowly. As you can see, there's a bit of cloud in that fluid. A little bit of grossness. The front isn't any different than the back. We're just working from our furthest wheel, right rear, right front, left front. Furthest from the master to the closest to the master. Okay, before we move on, science experiment time. Let's take our old fluid and we'll dump it into this here new receptacle because it's a little tough to test in here. And we'll see how much fluid we took out, if it's close to the same 12 ounces or less. Looks like a little bit less. Now, let's use our tool again and see what kind of reading we can come up with. Fluid from the calipers, not from the reservoir. All right, we're reading okay. Where is it at? Well, there we go. It's not too bad. Well, it was a bit more discolored. It's not reading any worse than the fluid in the reservoir did at 1% to 2%. So I'm pretty happy with that, actually. That shows me that there's some consistency in my system and that I didn't let it go too far. I knew that the fluid was okay, but I couldn't remember if I had changed it. So next thing we got to do is we got to reset the service indicator, and then we're gonna top off our reservoir, get the engine bay cleaned up, and get this thing back on the road. You gotta push it. There we go. Push and hold. You see our mileage comes back. Now reset possible, check. We can run through by tapping each one of these. And then the one we want to reset, we're gonna push and hold. It says reset, push and hold again. And it's resetting now. Now we've got our brake fluid reset for 2 years from now. Should be good to go. Well, to say I got lucky this time would be an understatement. The fluid level is right at the bottom. So yeah, I think that my recommendation moving forward would be to flush 2 wheels, fill it up, flush 2 wheels, fill it up. Perhaps not flush all 4 wheels and hope that you're good. Especially if you don't have a large reservoir, which in this case, it wasn't that big. It's just about 12 ounces. Well, actually it looks to be more like 14 at the end of the day, because I could have gotten a little more fluid in there. But wow, I guess I am living on a prayer here. The fluid level's at the bottom. I can see it down there though, so I didn't go that far. Whoo-wee! You know when you can feel your heart, your throat? This is one of those moments. I can see the fluid down there. And there we are. Right back to where she was before. I hope that you take a lesson out of this. How to do this safely, how to do it right, how to do it well. And you know what? I hope to see you in the next one. I'm gonna try again. Maybe we'll get it right next time.